welcome back to another episode of The Cup, Duet Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I will be your host for this episode, Ryan Borochovitz, and I'm joined by our wonderful associate artistic producer, Jillian Robinson. Hi, Jill. How are you doing today?
Hello, I am doing well today, Ryan.
Yes, I am hosting today because you are getting over a little procedure, tonsillectomy, that you had about 2 weeks ago, or just under 2 weeks ago. How are you feeling? How are the cords?
I am feeling like miraculously better today. I'm on day 12, I believe, but post-procedure up until about day 6 were some of the most painful days of my life. So I'm very happy to be back behind the mic doing one of these episodes, getting back into normalcy again and navigating my new vocal chamber at the back of my throat.
Well, fantastic. So I've taken over hosting duties so you can rest your voice as much as possible while still offering your nourishing thoughts and insights about this show, which is ARC's production of Rockabye by Joanna Murray-Smith. It is directed by Rob Kempson and is playing at Factory Theatre until February 11th, 2024. So we have a lot of things we can say about this show, as we'll get into right away. But before we do, I have to ask our favorite question. What is in your cup today?
Okay, so again, on the theme of normalcy, I have a rehearsal hall special. I have 3 drinks going right now. I'm also going to apologize. I might sound a bit thick and swollen on this episode. So to listeners,
how dare you?
Thank you for bearing with my guttural noises. So yes, so I have 3 drinks going. So we've got some water because hydration station. It's extra cold because soothing the cords. I have Boost, not sponsored, but I'll tell you, it's been some liquid food days past week.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner of champions.
Yeah, so this is the plus calories vanilla one. I also have high protein vanilla one, so there's some variation there. So sipping on that, and then I have a throat coat tea, and it's just lukewarm because I'm kind of getting myself back onto warm beverages slowly but surely, and of course, getting back on the throat coat tea train.
Nice.
So that's my novel about my cups, and it is in the cup, correct?
Yes.
What are you? Yeah, what are you sipping with us, Ryan?
So I have something I don't think I've ever had on the cup before because it's sort of been a new discovery, even though I've been aware that it exists. Iced coffee. I've been drinking in solidarity with you and not wanting to have hot beverages for your recovering throat. I've gotten into iced coffee, so nice. I got one right here. It's very delicious.
And it has the maple creamer in it too, right?
It does, which makes it super tasty.
Nice.
Nice. And
lovely. Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. So we're going to talk about Rockabye. As always, we will start with a brief non-spoiler section, and then we will put up a spoiler shield of some kind, and then we will get into anything goes from there. But before we do, Jill, why don't you start us off with a brief plot synopsis or description of the show?
Yeah. So for the synopsis, I'm gonna leave it quite vague-ish. I don't want to spoil too much. But Rockabye, as the title possibly suggests multiple things. So the story centers around Sydney, who is a rock pop star. We sort of right away get the inkling that she is kind of outside of her prime. She's an older star. And as the show opens up, we get the intel that she would like to adopt a baby. And so as we kind of throughout the piece go through her journey of that process, we have several characters that are integral to Sydney's life. So we have a personal assistant, we have a lover, we have a manager, we have the adoption coordinator, and we have an arbiter that sort of weave their way into Sydney's life regarding, what position they are to her. And as Sydney's sort of story and process unfolds, we also get a peek into all of these side supporting characters, their lives and their opinions and their wants and needs. And alongside that come big conversations about race, about gender, about womanhood, about fame, about fortune, about colonialism. And yeah, so the piece is kind of nestled in a bunch of sort of speedy vignette, most of the time 2-hander, 3-hander scenes. And yeah, kind of taking a line right out of Rob Kempson's director's note. It's sort of a piece that starts one way and it certainly does end another. And yeah, mixed in between, we'll get into it. But like incredible light spectacle, sound, very much sort of has the underbelly of a rock show, but then the underbelly of deep discussions of humanity and choice and opinions and options. That's kind of where I maybe want to leave that.
Nice.
Do you have
Yeah,
anything to add specifically,
no,
Ryan?
not in terms of, because I agree that we will definitely get into spoilers for this one, because in
Mhm.
order to have a robust discussion about the show, I think you do need to spoil some things, but we would like to keep this first segment spoiler free. I think you did a good job of kind of wrapping it in a little bow without getting too much into the weeds. What about general appraisals? What did you think of it, non-spoiler still?
Yeah, again, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the performance. We'll get into, I think, discussing the text itself, the play text itself has, again, we'll get into, I have some qualms about, but I thought the performance on an acting and creative level, absolutely astonishing. Again, I felt like I was at a rock show in some moments. I was emotional on the edge of my seat, goosebumps, hair standing up on some of the argumentative moments that happened in this piece. Phenomenal stage presence and chemistry with some extremely well-known and popular artists on our Toronto stages right now: Deborah Drakeford, Christopher Allen, Shauna Thompson, et cetera, et cetera. Again, we might unpack more character specifics as the episode goes along, but thoroughly enjoyed it. Also, it was opening night, the performance Ryan and I attended, and the audience itself was very juicy and in on the whole thing as well. So yeah, great. I had a great time. How about you? What was your praise?
Yeah, I've been chewing over kind of how I feel about this show since leaving the theater. I think this is a very excellent production of what I would call a very flawed text, in my opinion. I don't quite feel like I love the play itself. I do think the whole team at ARC, they did an excellent job breathing life into it and playing with it and unpacking a lot of its nuances, but
Yeah.
I think why I'm leaving a bit lukewarm has a lot to do with the text itself. As you alluded to, you have some qualms there as well that we will definitely unpack further as we go, but I don't want any of that to be a reflection on the company themselves. The actors, the performances, the design was all stellar,
Yeah.
top-notch work from everybody involved, and to say more about that would maybe teeter into Spoilerville, so I'm happy to
Very
leave
true.
my general appraisal there.
Yeah. Love that.
Okay, should we get into spoilers? Anything last
Yes.
thoughts you want to say? So before we do, this is ARC's production of Rockabye once again. It is an Australian play from 2009. Actually, I don't think I said in the intro, by Joanna Murray-Smith. It is directed by Rob Kempson and is playing at Factory Theatre until February 11th, 2024. Now, a supernova will show up on the screen. We didn't discuss in advance what it's going to be,
love
so I
it.
just decided on the fly. A supernova that says spoilers is now currently on the screen. Everything from here is going to be a spoiler-rich discussion. So,
Nice.
where would you like to start?
I love that. Supernova is, spoiler alert, one of the hit songs that Sydney has. Yeah, so I kind of want to start with the designing, like sound and lighting. So we had our lighting designer, Jareth Lee, and our composer and sound designer, Adrian Shepard Gowinski. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing any folks' names. What a brilliant marriage of these two designs. We've talked about this on a lot of recent episodes, but I've recently really been hyper aware of like lighting and sound in these plays that have heavy light and heavy sound presence, versus like a musical. It's obvious you have those designing elements going on, but in plays, it's maybe not as in your face. And something like quite literally with Rockabye, they had the big sort of pop concert-esque pot lights in the upstage that were flashing in audiences' faces, especially during transitions, and really packing poignant moments. And accompanied with those light bursts was like perfect 80s weaving tidbits of like what we might hear on Sydney's albums, which I thought was such a clever cover in transitions and a clever sort of like pulse, either taking us out of a big moment of the play or bringing us into a lighter moment of the play. I just thought kudos to both of those designers for really understanding sort of I don't know if this makes sense, the tissue that they belong in the body of the performance. And alongside that, Again, transitions. Again, we've talked about this in other past recent episodes. Flawless transitions. Again, it was a piece where all of the whole company has a specific duty of striking set pieces, bringing things on, swiveling around. Even in the moments or the scenes where chaos is displayed, you can tell it was like meticulously placed chaos by the actors. And then, bam, there's your playground to just unveil what that scene is all about. And again, it's very precise, well executed. Hats off to Rob Kempson. I think this was a very, like you mentioned earlier, Ryan, like a very tight, packed direction of this piece that just allowed all these actors to absolutely soar. And again, I love a minimalist set, and it really was. They had like the sofa sort of chairs that kind of changed into like a lounge chair kind of thing, or like a love seat. So those would swivel around depending on if we were in an office or a hotel room. And then that was sort of the foreground of the set. And then baked almost like behind the cyc, this whole back space of the upstage area, having that be a bedroom scene and sort of having curtains being pulled and closed. And that's also alluding to a line in the text too. Yeah, just a wonderful use of the Factory Theater stage. And with the whole looming
I was going to say,
picture Sydney photograph sort of again glaring at us that entire time. I'm talking a lot.
Yeah,
I'm gonna let you take that,
because you mentioned, yes, obviously the lighting and the sound design were great. I do want to shout out Jackie Chow, the set and costume design, and you've mentioned the love seat configuration was very well used. Everything moved around the stage very well in the transitions, but the big showpiece for me was that Andy Warhol-esque painting of the 4 quadrants of Sydney's face, and the fact that was integrated into the lighting design where each quadrant lit up in a certain way was just very what a marriage of various scenography elements played perfectly there. Because Jackie Chow also did the costume design, what a palette of costumes we have here.
So good.
And some of it like very pointedly plays into the themes of perhaps cultural appropriation and taking things from African designs that maybe don't belong to you, but feeling entitled to them, which I think we see a lot represented in some of the costumes, certainly Sydney's, and that being very thematically resonant in the show. Obviously, we're not accusing Jackie Chow of being a cultural appropriate here. You understand what I mean? And and that there was and the fact that characters changed costumes as the days changed, which also like really required a big breadth of different things there. And near the final, one of the last costume pairings we had between Sydney and her assistant Julia, where it was the greens and the pinks staggered in different ways, that they were sharing a photo negative almost of like the same experience about wanting a child and going to have a child, which I thought was a very nice touch there. So definitely. Just all the designs across the board were all amazing and very well handled.
I love that. It's so funny. I feel like usually I'm the one unpacking costuming and you're taking the words right out of my mouth. I love it. You're like, I'm going to take a stab at costuming. We love it.
It was good stuff. Good little nuggets. I was like, I noticed what we're doing here. What about the cast? Anybody stand out to you in particular?
Christopher Allen. I mean, everyone in this, again, what a rich cast and packing a punch. And the thing about this piece too is every character almost has their own sort of characterization. Some characters even on like a very stereotypical cartoony-esque, like the manager and the lover, who, Elfie being the manager and Jillian being our lover as the characters. But Christopher Allen, just once again, like we've seen him in Redbone Coonhound, we've seen him in Master Plan, just what a force, an absolute force. The character that Christopher plays is Tobias, the arbiter, and basically, finds out that Sydney is adopting a baby from Africa. And we find out his character. He's a Cambridge grad. He grew up sort of, we get the impression living like a life of lavish lifestyle. And we find out he was adopted himself, and he grapples with the whole notion of, Western society adopting African babies, and, his opinion being, the character's opinion being like, that's not fair. You're, stripping from them their African culture and kind of forcing them into a life of assimilation. and there maybe is another life that they could have known back in Africa. So we just get sort of, that's a very glazed way
We'll
of
talk more about the more deeper elements of the plot later. That's fine for.
But I just feel like the character is just like comes across as this very suave, luxurious person living high-end life, and then you hear his backstory and just the text that Christopher Allen has of going like so descriptive, so in-depth, very vivid memories and vocabulary. So we get that in the back half of the play. And so that almost like that contrast, that like heel turn into his character is like hypnotizing to watch how Christopher Allen navigated that switch in such a raw, real human way that was like beautifully messy and packed with constant questions and not knowing answers. And I catch my breath listening to Christopher Allen perform, because I feel like he really gets at the core of humans, of life, of, what it is like. Anyways, I'm starstruck.
No,
And also the scenes he has with Shauna Thompson, again, what a true force. Three Sisters, Bad Roads, like Shauna we've seen across our stages as well. And the two of them in Prodigal, yes, of course, the two of them just like holding space for each other and sort of navigating and leaping over each other's hurdles with these conversations, I thought was like extremely well executed on an acting front. Yeah, it's rippling. It's a rippling effect that's going to keep me engaged for some time. Yeah. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, like I completely agree about everything you're saying. Yeah, there's not much to add to what you said, but I think something that Christopher has a real talent for, and I'll say I found this in his performance of this even before the big sort of like high trauma moments where we find out more about his backstory, but even in the earlier moments when he's a journalist, he's going to be writing this article about Sydney, and he's listening to the album, and every time he talks about the album, he kind of, there's like this smile and this lightness to him about how it's really good, and he recognizes there's something special here, and it takes me back to his performance in The Master Plan, where he really was this beacon of hope in this very otherwise cynical play, and he just has a way with his text that he really is able to bring a lightness and a hope to something, I guess, for lack of a better word, and hope also being a theme in this play, as even though he becomes very much the character who seems to lack hope more than anyone, that it's nice to see the sparks of it early on, so we feel the loss of once he realizes what's really happening here and at stake here, and why he has such a heel turn against it, that just kind of gets to his core and sucks the hope out of the room. It hits so hard because we saw it there early on. Yeah. And please.
Also, like, just picking up on that and harkening back to Rob Kempson's directorial note, and how this play, as you mentioned, was written in 2009, and it was, and a part of importance for Rob in his notes saying, like, doing this in 2023, and how, these conversations about gender and about racism and colonialism, like, we are still having them. And these characters that existed in 2009, newsflash, still exist today. And sort of like, mentioning how this piece does still resonate and can exist on our stages and have meaning. And I think what you just said, Ryan, like, what a beautiful sort of tackling of, taking that directorial spark or inspiration, Christopher Allen, and, being able to still say that 2009 tech in a 2023 audience, and doing exactly what you said, like hitting all those marks, right? And bringing, issues and opinions to the table and making people confront them, or, providing questions and answers that they're still in the world we live in today, are unanswered or avoided.
So, just to shout out some other members of the cast, Deborah Drakeford, who we've obviously talked about on the show a lot. It's funny, she has to walk a very difficult line in this show, because you spend the whole first, I would say, half of the show thinking it's about her and that she's the main character and she has to bring big protagonist energy. And then once we get into the sort of various plot twists, it becomes very apparent that, oh, this actually isn't her story at all, and the fact that she thinks it's her story is indicative of what the actual story is about, that maybe it's not about you, white celebrity person, who your midlife crisis maybe isn't the most important thing happening in the world, and the things you do to try to assuage that are maybe contributing to larger problems as well. So I think in Deborah's performance, she did such an interesting job of playing. There was a lot of like really great, I'll say like Michael Scott cringe comedy, I think, in a lot of the early scenes.
Right.
The one where we first see her and Shauna's character, Layla, together, and like she puts her foot in her mouth about how like, ooh, you must be making your parents very proud and good for you for succeeding in life. And she's like, yeah, my parents went to Cambridge, were super wealthy, like, don't make these assumptions. It's just like the way she reacted to it were so, like just tingle down your spine how painfully awkward it is, which... Oh, it was wonderful, chef's kiss. And yeah, she really just, like the character is a big baby, for lack of a better word, and like she took that characterization point and really committed to it, and I think it played very well as throughout her entire piece.
Mm-hmm.
Another one I really do want to shout out is Sergio DeZio, who played manager Alfie. Just, man, what a performance he gives.
Yeah, so good.
He's just like, I think it's implied that he's constantly on cocaine, although I feel like you don't even need to have that in your head to be like, this is just who this person is, but he's constantly just talking up a storm, getting himself out of breath. I don't even know if it's the actor making himself out of breath or if it's just the character who's just constantly going on, and you can see him running out of air as he's going. And like every time he was on stage, it was such a treat.
And just to add to that too, like the physical comedy, again, chef's kiss for that whole character. Like I just noticed like the way he was gesticulating and using his arms and sitting down, and just there was a true masterful approach to what Sergio wanted to pack that character with, and it doesn't change throughout the whole. Like he is a firecracker through the whole show.
And one of my favorite like physical comedy moments is when he's just like, he picks up Christopher's water bottle and just like takes a sip out of it, and then just like Christopher noticing and just like looking out at the audience. And this feels almost like an episode of The Office at times. I know I just use that example, but the fact that there is even this sort of awareness of like, not that the show really itself breaks the fourth wall, except for obvious moments where like they're framing like a talk show and then they're playing to both each other and the audience, but it's also the fake TV audience. But like it really, this kind of not so hidden camera view seemed to be very much a panopticon over the entire piece. Was there anyone else in the cast you wanted to do last shout outs? I know that we haven't talked about all of them.
Nabil Travolsi, as always, playing our Jillian, and Kurt. Again, talk about on cocaine. Like Kurt was this German, fellow German celebrity or philanthropist that Sydney talks to in one scene. And I was like, I know exactly who this guy is. Just like, scratching the neck, just the accent was over the top. It was amazing. But so the main character that Nabil played in this was Jillian, I believe is how you pronounce that character's name. And he's just a wanker, isn't he? He's like the epitome of like your like scrawny British, band geek guy that's, ready for a romp at any time and just like smokes, drinks, love rock and roll, that's kind of just like who this character is. And, at first I was kind of like, who is this? And then we find out it's kind of like Sid's like lover. And I just thought like this kind of, I guess, weaves into Julie Lumpson, who plays Julia, the personal assistant of Sydney. There's quite a lot of scenes between Julia and Jillian, and it's interesting too, like their names kind of sound the same too, but these are like people who are like, we see as the closest to Sydney in her life. And just the two of them, I just think like their Nabil and Julie's chemistry were just like really lovely. And like I totally bought that these were just sort of like the second tiered people to Sydney's life, and basically their entire lives has to revolve around Sydney's ego and choices. And I just thought the banter, the play that the two of them have were phenomenal. And Nabil, like we've seen Nabil in a bunch of things, Martyr.
He's different every time.
different every time. And
It's in
again,
that Cheetos commercial with Cindy
yes,
Liu.
such a force and such specificity. Like there's a part where Julian was like sitting on the ground downstage and like I think was talking to Alfie and like fiddling with like he had a bunch of rings on his finger and just kind of like weirdly like fiddling with his rings. And I'm like, yeah, that's like so specific and exactly what that character with that guy would do. And just, yeah, again, a masterful approach to such a wacky character.
Yes. Yeah, no, agreed. Like, yeah, I think the best way to sum up his approach to that character is just like, this is a guy who, will just say whatever's on his mind and laugh at all of his own jokes. Like, he has no filter whatsoever. And
Definitely.
yeah, like the whole Das Boot monologue, which like I have dramaturgical things I'll say about the play itself soon. And like, I get why that scene is there. I think we can cut that scene, but that's nothing against his like brilliant performance, the tears in his eyes describing his emotional connection to the movie Das Boot and the thrill of getting to watch it in Germany. Like, it's just delight. I would watch Nabil do that monologue just out of context at a monologue slam anytime.
Yeah.
Does it need to be in this play? That's a different story.
Yeah.
But, so one last person in the cast we haven't talked about, just Tyra Harper, who plays Esme, who is like a fun... what exactly would we say her job is in Sydney's life? She's not quite a personal assistant. She's like a maid or a cook.
Almost like a personal chef, because she was involved a lot with with the food and drink,
Yeah, like it's kind of reprising. We've seen obviously Cairo play in Fisa and Three Sisters, that same production that Shauna was in. And like this almost felt like an extension of that role, a very similar type of Chekhovian maid character who's just like, I'm always here, I know the family better than anyone. Right. But then we learn more about her backstory, about that she was a rocker groupie girl herself. She was Keith Richards' best lay ever, I think I forget the exact phrasing she used, but was something to that effect. And then in a very much later scene, we find out that she has a pretty hard homophobic edge to her that, did not see this coming, and she does a good job of selling the conviction of that while also knowing that, and I've lost the sympathy of most of the audience in this moment. So yeah, hats off to her to play that sort of challenging, unexpected kind of role there.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. We've strummed the whole guitar. Mm-hmm. And the cast guitar. So let's roll back to, you said dramaturgically, you want to unpack a little bit about the text itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So this is a strange play, I will say. And I think it goes back to the thing that you quoted earlier from Rob's director's note here, is that he says, I'll say it again just for context, Rockabye is my favorite kind of play. As an audience member, you think you know what you're experiencing, but by the end you realize that the play has become something else entirely. And that's definitely true. Like, I 100% not denying that. And I think that is both this play's greatest strength and, unfortunately, also kind of its part of its biggest weakness, and at least for me. And let me sort of try to explain why. So we have the whole, we're introduced to Sydney and her world for like the whole, like a good almost the first half of the play. And we spend a lot of time with her and the people around her, filling out all of that in order, I think, to dramaturgically set up a bait and switch where you think it's about her and what's going on in her life, but actually it's about the fate of African orphans, is what the plot eventually reveals itself to be about. And this is introduced in her plotline by the fact that she wants to adopt this baby whom she held and feels this connection with and really, wants to be part of the solution as she sees it. And we have the character of Layla, who is facilitating that and certainly also sees herself as being part of a solution to larger problems that are tied in with the mechanisms of colonial history. But then we get Tobias as, first, it just seems like he's kind of being like a tabloid gotcha journalist who's like, oh, this is something controversial that you, famous celebrity, is doing, and I'm going to knock you down a peg by pointing it out. But then in the scenes between Tobias and Layla, we find out that there's a lot more personal stakes for him, that he too was adopted at 18 months, taken away from, I believe he said he was from Nairobi or a village close to Nairobi.
Yep.
Something that I think this isn't, certainly my most substantial critique, but something that I think is a little weird in the writing of this play is the vagueness with which Africa is constantly referred to, that these aren't specific countries or geographies, that this is just the whole dark continent is painted with one very large brush. I honestly couldn't tell you what country the baby in question is actually going to come from. There was an early line about Johannesburg, but I don't remember if that was actually in relation to the baby itself or if that was something to do with Layla's upbringing or where she's currently working. So, but it was just very much this is about babies from Africa more so. And like, it just, that feels like a neo-colonialist way of looking at the entire continent that has a lot of cultural diversity, even though there is something to be said for Pan-African political interests, but that's a different story whatsoever. And yeah, so anyway, that's just a side tangent there. But then I guess once we realized that the whole Sydney plotline was basically just setting us up to have this more serious conversation that allows the actual characters of color to unpack their complex, nuanced views of this. I really just wanted the play to let itself be about that. That, like, okay, I get why we spent so much time with Sydney and her world, so that we could be surprised that, oh, you thought it was about this middle or north of middle-aged white woman's and her view of how she can help this, geopolitical issue. But actually, we're missing the point if we focus on it from her perspective. Let's hear some different perspectives from the people who are actually have more skin in the game. But then, it almost, I want to say, like, this is a sort of a trilogy of mini plays in one, because we start with the Sydney play, then we move into the Tobias Layla dialectic, and after we had the big scene there where Tobias breaks down and we find out his personal relation to it, I was kind of hoping the play would just end there and leave us contemplating this. But then it kept going and it became an almost third play that is back to Sydney, spends a lot more time with Sydney than I was expecting us to get after we're being very pointedly told it's not about her. And then it also just becomes a play about Julia and her baby. And we spend sort of, I think, way too much time about, who's the father of the baby that she's having with her partner in her lesbian relationship. And we find out that, Jillian is the father. And, and I say the Das Boot scene, I get the function it serves in the plot, because that tells us that was probably the night that Julia decided that she wanted him to be the father because of the genuine emotional feels he brought for this movie that she thought was silly and was quick to dismiss earlier. But it just, why are we going back to these characters after the play has shown its hand at the more interesting thing that it has on its mind? Yeah. And I guess, and maybe I don't want it to be charitable. I don't want to say that it should have necessarily ended in that scene where I wanted it to end. But I think we could have cut out a lot of the scenes between that and then the very end. Because I do like the idea of this last scene where Layla is contemplating, am I going to sign it? Am I going to let Sydney adopt the baby? And I love that final image we get of her maybe going to sign, maybe not, lights out, who's to say? Because at the end of the day, I think she's the protagonist of the story, Layla. Yeah. And, the fact that she's the one who has, like, the moral dilemma, the arc. Yeah. Tobias is also kind of a protagonist in his own way, and it's sort of a very Hegelian tragedy in this way, that it's not a conflict between right and wrong, it's between two rights, that they both make compelling points, and we don't really know who to side with. Yeah. But I just wish we could have lived in that world, or committed to that. Whereas it seems like a bait and switch that was then too quick to switch back. And I don't know how I feel about that. It left me very lukewarm in what I thought could have been a very powerful gut punch. Still was powerful, but then weakened that power as it went. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. Please.
No, because I agree with you too. And I think this is something we chatted about, like, prior to jumping into this conversation too, of, like, to me, it kind of felt like, I see what you're saying. It felt like almost the playwright had these, like, large concepts and little sort of, like, micro vignettes to sort of unpack it all. And then she just, like, sewed it all together and then didn't trim off excess fat from that merging of them, if that makes sense. Because, like, even I like that we get a peek into all of the supporting characters' sort of opinions and lives, even if it is just through, like, a monologue. Like you just said, Jillian has a huge monologue. So does Alfie. Like, all of these characters have definitely chunks of tech that you're like, I know exactly who that character is just by that paragraph that they said. But in the whole arc of, like, what the piece is doing or wanting to do, we didn't need certain scenes, I think, even. Like, so it's interesting. Like, to me, it seemed like there was like a framework of what the playwright wanted, and then just patched it all together. And then it's like, here's the piece, which again, in my opinion, there were some, like I said, some things needed to be trimmed, or kind of what you're saying. There's three different things going on and maybe not fully serving each other, but maybe some folks would be like, oh, I kind of liked that it was kind of a smattering of everything going around, revolving around, but yeah, I kind of agree with you. The structure of the piece itself and the going a little bit too far into sidelines and sidetracks and B cast bits. It was almost like it was like biting off more than it needed to chew.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Right. Well, and just the fact that it also wanted to tackle homophobia within the
right,
and that I can see how a lot of these things are related to each other, especially when it comes into adopting and/or parenting children. Like, I get why these things seem like they're connected, but I don't really feel like they congeal into a thematic exploration of this idea from various angles. Like, the whole, in my view, and I'm happy if somebody caught something that I miss, I'm happy to be corrected by this, get in the comments if you'd like, but I don't feel like Julia's baby tells me anything new about what we were, like, the very meaty thematic core of this play, which is about adopting African babies. That's not, if she was thinking of doing the same or adopting a white baby, and maybe that kind of became a contrast or a foil in some way, but the fact that there are certain characters have different views on whether or not two women can raise a child together, which this is a very 2009 play, I guess. I understand that there are still people today who would hold the dissenting opinion on that, but and I'm not gonna critique the play for the very casual and not so casual homophobia that the characters express. I understand that the play is not endorsing those opinions. I'm not going to fault it for that, and it is a product of its time, but it just, it felt like a lot of ideas that didn't quite come together. Like the cynical Monday morning quarterback version of it that I would like to say, that I don't, obviously this is very speculative, and I'm not suggesting this is actually what happened, but watching the play, I got the sense that she wrote the version, Joanna Murray-Smith, the playwright, wrote the version that I think would have been very good, where it kind of builds towards the argument between Tobias and Layla and kind of lets the play end there. But then I feel like some nosy dramaturg or a focus group or somebody said, but what about Sydney? Wasn't it about her? And then, like, fine, I'll write more stuff for Sydney, I guess, to culminate her story, even though I thought what was so effective is that yes, I agree it was important to spend all that time with Sydney at the beginning so we could have that reveal or to have that pivot. But then, it undercuts itself by then pivoting back to that in a way that didn't necessarily further nourish what the play then decided it was about. And also in a way that, like, there are things from those later scenes that I would keep, like when Sydney makes counter arguments about why she thinks it's right, and, we can agree or disagree with her opinions on that, but they at least add more texture to the discussion. But I just feel like there was a little too much subplot in this play that's already kind of long. It's sort of almost 3 hours long with the intermission. And since it also has this very kind of 3-act structure, as I sort of mapped out there, like, I'm not saying it would have necessarily been fixed by having 2 shorter intermissions as opposed to 1, but it felt very much like Act 2 was 2 acts in its own right.
Right.
So, which kind of made it lopsided. You know me, I'm not against long plays. I think if a play can very easily earn its length, but I don't really feel like this one did, and I think it could have been a lot stronger and tighter and sharper if it had trimmed a lot of the fat and really focused on, now that we've revealed what this play is about, we're going to send you home to think about what it's about.
Right. And again, this all coming from the writing itself. Like,
of course, yes.
We've totally unpacked all this too, and just what was brought to the stage by this company and helmed by Rob Kempson, and with all of the performers, was like astonishing. So like,
that's why we front loaded all of the stuff we loved about the production itself before. I didn't want to kick down the game, be like, these are all the things I don't like about the writing itself.
But honestly, like, as a performer, and like, that is difficult sometimes to be inside of a play that is like that. And especially, we always talk about doing, bringing plays from our past and doing them now. Well, a lot of the times that's like the Shakespeare's, or that's like the modern dramas. And it's funny to say this, but like 2009 was a long time ago. And so it is a play of the past, but not a very distant past. So it sort of unpacks this like recent past that is problematic or, does have different strokes than what we have today. And it's, stepping into the shoes of doing a show like that in 2023 and where things have exponentially changed, especially in the 20 teens, but then even more so post pandemic. Like there's a lot more baggage sort of weighing this piece down. And again, like how the cast and creatives navigated it. That's a feat. Like, it's not easy.
Yeah, no,
it's not easy to do.
Yeah, and I think like to compare it to something like Martyr, which was the last ARC show that we reviewed, and we also I think had some commentary then about how that play was also I think a lot more recent than this one, but still like a number of years old, and we could sort of feel the weight of the intervening years in between that. Right. Yeah, like there's something admirable about what this company does / is doing about taking, not so recent works, but not so distant works either, and being like, we don't have to wait 100 years to rediscover this and treat it as a period piece, that it is very much still with us. Or you want to add something to that?
Maybe they build an arc.
They built an arc.
A little arc.
Yeah, 2 of every easy to forget plays from 20 years ago or whatever. And
no, I mean like they bridge, they bridge a smaller gap.
Okay.
No, an arc's like a bridge. Oh my gosh. No, like they build a bridge, a smaller gap, which to be honest, that's more, in my opinion, more difficult than,
agreed. When you take an old public domain play, you have the freedom to do whatever you want with this. So this playwright is still alive. It's not that old a play. It is very much under copyright, and anything that we critique about the text itself, their hands are kind of tied. Now they have the freedom to choose whichever play they want, and I don't want to take away from Rob himself that this is his favorite kind of play, as he says in the program note. And I would agree. I love plays that kind of trick you into thinking you're seeing one thing and do something else. I just don't love the way that this particular play handled that very difficult needle to thread.
Sure.
I think it succeeded at it until it didn't, and that really did take a lot of the steam out for me, unfortunately.
Right. But the stage was fiery. And definitely it is something to, speaking of fiery, we are doing this recording, and this episode will go out in the dreary winter months. So like we've been saying this since the dawn of time, but live theater, our stages are alight or on fire. The performances, like we said, are fiery. The lights blaze the stage. Wow. Should I keep going on these fire analogies? Do it. So definitely a treat to see, like treat yourself to this delight. I definitely, a fun thing I don't think we mentioned, but if ARC is opening up for donations, if you donate at least $5 or more, you get like a downloaded version of the song that was specifically composed for the show. Supernova. And it's peppered in throughout the show, and it is a bop. Like I was dancing in those transitions. So that's an added bonus to take home after your experience. And again,
maybe
supporting.
We'll put the link for that donation link so people can get access to the song in the description of this episode.
Definitely, yeah. Supporting this phenomenal company, ARC. Thank you for putting work on our stages always.
And they made a lot with what I assume was a very small budget. The fact that we had so many great things to say about the design elements, that they really took however small their budget was and really made it sing and dance.
Absolutely.
And, hats off to all of them for that very economical and very artful use of it.
Amen. Okay. I think that sums up Rockabye.
Okay, yay, Rockabye, baby, we did it. Okay, so Jill, I'm hosting, so I will lob it to you. Where can people find and follow you if they want to know all about your theater and tonsil antics?
Wow, tonsil antics. So yes, you can follow me at my artist Instagram account, Jillian.Robinson96. I recently just posted a fresh singing clip of Nina Simone's Feeling Good because I'm finally feeling good. But also you can, tune in for covers, upcoming projects I have on the go. As this episode goes in, I'm swinging into the last couple weeks of mentoring a production of Legally Blonde happening at Hart House. One of the student groups there is putting it on. So that's been a wonderful experience, sort of being on hand for the student directors to bounce ideas off of. And it's always good to jump into Legally Blonde in the winter. I was actually in a production of Legally Blonde in the winter of 2020, right before the pandemic. Like I only do Legally Blonde in the dreary months, but hey, We love a bubblegum musical these days. Oh my God, you guys. Yeah. So that's enough about me. Ryan, how about you?
Well, no need to find and follow me personally, but if you like me and you like hearing me go on and on about dramaturgy and stuff, all of those thoughts tend to live here on the Cup. So you can follow us at COH Theatre on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are Cup of Hemlock Theatre on YouTube, where you might be watching this, or Cup of Hemlock Theatre podcast in the podcast places where you might be listening to this with your ears. Like, share, subscribe, do all of the things. All right. Well, that ties a bow on Rockabye for us. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening and joining us on this adventure, and we will see you real soon in